What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 148. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. On today's show, I'm talking about Afghanistan, where the state that the U.S. has built over the past 2 years is crumbling under a Taliban offensive. 10 of the provincial capitals have already been seized. The Taliban are stealing weapons, vehicles, they're freeing prisoners, and so it looks like it's on, and the Taliban are making rapid gains in their offensive. This is forcing the U.S. to make some tough decisions very quickly, including what to do with our embassy in Kabul, which not only houses diplomatic and civilian staff, but also 650 U.S. soldiers that are still in that country. So, all that and more on today's show. It's going to be a great one. Be sure to share the show. You find it at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle for a full archive of the show. I'm also the news editor at the Libertarian Institute, so my daily news roundup is at that URL as well. You can also find the show on YouTube, Rumble, or Odyssey for the video version. We also have the video version embedded on the post at the Libertarian Institute. Also, when it appears on the blog at antiwar.com. Video version of the show has maps and a whole bunch of other stuff, all the articles we talk about. Nice news ticker on there, so I definitely recommend checking that out and subscribing on one of those video platforms if you haven't already. We are also getting the show up on some other YouTube alternatives. Me and Will have had some trouble in the past week using some of the YouTube features, and so we're concerned it's only a matter of time before we're removed from that platform. You can follow us on any of our social media accounts, Twitter, Facebook, and MeWe. You could donate to the show. Me and Will want to upgrade some of our equipment, better audio and better video equipment coming up soon. Maybe some long-term upgrade, laptops so we could do more editing-wise and some more features. But for now, we really just want to improve the video and the audio quality. So if you would like to support that and help us meet those goals, you can go either to, again, Patreon or Subscribestar and donate separate monthly recurring donations. Another way you could help support the show is by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com is the URL, and the promo code is PEACE when you check out. That gets you 25% off when you spend $75 or more. And, Paloma Verde is where you should be going to get your CBD products, regardless if, you want to support this show or not, just because they're the best quality CBD products I've had. Everything works as it's billed to, and, is because they have their lab test results up there. They put the CBD in their products that they say they do. They also infuse their products with different things like melatonin or curcumin, and this is going to help you get additional effects that will help you experience additional redundant inflammation, anxiety, or help you get to sleep at night. So there's a wide variety of great products. I really like their sports cream. Anytime I get up and do something after, the next day I'm a little bit sore, I put it on in the morning and it alleviates my pain. If not for hours, by middle of the day I'm a little loosened up, I feel less sore, and I don't even need to reapply it. So it's absolutely awesome. Really recommend all their products. PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE, PEACE, when you check out. That gets you 25% off when you spend $75 or more. Now let's get into the show. The first story I have is very interesting. It's, I guess, a mostly secret NSA contract for a new cloud program, and it was awarded to Amazon. Apparently, Amazon actually got this contract at the beginning of September, but I'm just now seeing it reported at Netsgov, which is, I think, kind of a U.S. subsidized site, actually. Anyways, what we're finding out here is that the NSA has awarded a secret cloud computing contract worth up to $10 billion to Amazon Web Services, AWS. The contract is already being challenged. Tech giant Microsoft filed a protest bid on July 21st, 2 weeks after being notified that the NSA had selected AWS for the contract. So I guess both agencies did know about this secret contract and bid on it. Not a whole lot is known about this contract other than it has to do with an NSA cloud program, and it's codenamed Windy and Stormy. Something kind of interesting about this is I believe the direction the U.S. intelligence community was going was not for these intelligence agencies to build their own cloud software, but rather to build a cloud software to integrate the networks. And so I'm not sure if this is a part of what I think they call the C2E platforms, and what the CIA is awarding and setting up, or if this is a separate program that the NSA is running something for in-house. Now, there's reasons, a lot of reasons to be concerned about this. The main one is just, the ties between big tech and the military industrial complex, the intelligence complex here, the deep state and the government. These are massive contracts. AWS is Amazon's most profitable sector, and we're talking about not just up to $10 billion for this, but of course the Pentagon was offering a cloud contract called JEDI that Amazon Web Services sued over several times, to the point where the Pentagon has now scrapped it and is offering a new contract. There's also the C2E program that the U.S. intelligence agencies is putting together. Back in 2013, Amazon Web Services actually got $600 million for that, and right now that contract I think is worth multi-billion dollars, and is being split mostly between Amazon Web Services, Microsoft. But I think IBM, Google, and Oracle also all get a piece of that contract. Microsoft's challenge, I'm not sure, if it's going to be awarded or not. There's a lot of issues with people going from these agencies, or contractors from these agencies, to these, big tech companies. And then what happened with the JEDI, the Pentagon cloud contract, was, I believe it was awarded to Microsoft twice, but it was found that the Pentagon had somebody on the payroll who had already signed a contract with Microsoft, who was advocating for kind of a way for Microsoft to get the whole contract. And so Amazon sued, but it's a whole mess how much these tech companies claw over each other to try to get all these contracts. And of course, they getting money from the government's important, and having hiring people who work for the NSA or CIA to Apple or whatever is important to have this, so then you have more of that influence at Apple, but also our Amazon, Apple, any of these companies, big tech companies. But then on top of that too, maybe these companies will decide that the more they play ball on pushing the narrative of the CIA and all of this, and maybe on Twitter's end, making sure they're censoring and promoting content that's for more war, more intervention in Afghanistan, rather than promoting content that's against it. And so I think all that plays into this as well. So it's really problematic. And then the other thing is let's say Amazon does a good job on this and doesn't just waste our taxpayer dollars, then the NSA is going to have a more effective system to surveil on all of us, which is a negative part of all of this as well. So this is really concerning that this is being done and the contract is happening so secretly. I'm somewhat concerned that if Microsoft didn't file this complaint, that we wouldn't have even known it was happening at all, and it would be not until like an Edward Snowden comes along, in 2025 and, leaks documents and blows the whistle on Windy and Stormy. Now we have some idea that this exists, and hopefully, the independent media at the very least could continue to expose what's happening here. Next up, we have some updates on Assange's extradition hearing. This isn't great news. There's a couple of good write-ups on this, one by Kevin Gosztola that he has here on Twitter, also at his Dissenter outlet. And then I also have a piece here from Brett Wilkins that ran at Common Dreams and also is reprinted at antiwar.com. Gosztola kind of breaks down what's happening here first. And so for anybody who's been following the Assange Assange extradition, knows that the judge in the original hearing, I believe her name was Vanessa Bannister, ended up ruling that Assange could not be extradited to the United States, not because, if it was a violation of free speech laws, which it obviously is, and all of these other kind of constitutional freedom of speech issues, the fact that Julian Assange has heroically published a lot of information that the people not only of the United States but the world has a right to know. All those reasons, for not destroying journalism, she should have ruled against this, but rather she ruled against it because she found that Assange had a mental illness, I believe autism being the main one, and that the cruel and U.S. prison system, likely facing solitary confinement, all of that would lead to a situation where, because of his mental illness, autism, being placed in that situation, your mental illness will then cause you to kill yourself. And that's what she ruled. Not just that, it's kind of summarized in the mainstream media all the time that the judge ruled that Assange was going to kill himself, and that's why she can't extradite him. That's a really shortened way of saying that the U.S. prison system in the U.S. is so cruel that the UK has decided that people who are on the autism spectrum can't be extradited to the U.S. because that cruel prison system makes it likely that they will kill themselves. So the U.S. appealed that ruling, saying that we believe Assange should be extradited, and they appealed it, against really all those conditions, saying that Assange didn't have a mental illness, that the U.S. prison system isn't that cruel, and that even if he had mental illness, it won't cause him to kill himself. And so initially, the High Court of the UK ruled partly in favor with the U.S. on the narrow grounds that we could discuss if Assange maybe could be extradited because the U.S. prison system isn't as cruel as the original Judge Barrister, believes. And the U.S., made some guarantees saying that we'll promise that he will be sent to Australia if he's convicted to serve out a sentence. He won't be put into SAMS, the special administration measure. These are the very polite way of saying solitary confinement, torture, not allowing people outside, not having communications, limited communications with lawyers. 23 and a half hours a day you're in your cell. Maybe you get a half hour to take a shower and get a little exercise. Limited materials of what you could have in your cell. I remember Chelsea Manning had a magazine that she was on the cover of, taken out of her cell when she was in SAM. So there's all these really terrible parts to the U.S. prison system, and that's what they initially granted the U.S. the right to appeal. Now, the U.S., I guess, then appealed, through the UK prosecutor, appealed that decision as well, and said that, we really need to observe these other two facts and say that Assange, we don't think he has autism, and we don't think that if he has autism, sending him to the U.S. Would make him kill himself. The main crux of their argument, of course, goes against Assange having autism, and the original judge in her ruling wrote that she made that decision because of the expert testimony from a witness from the defense, Assange's side, Michael Kopelman, and he found again that Assange had autism. Now, at the time, I guess Kopelman evaluated Assange. Assange gave him information. Kopelman, I believe, also talked to people around Assange, to have further evidence of his autism diagnosis. And one of the things that Kopelman apparently did not lay out in his report was that Julian Assange had a partner, Stella Morris, and two children, because that was not known to anybody at the time. The Crown, the UK government, the US government is arguing that hiding that makes him an partial witness, not an impartial witness, and his testimony should be thrown out in favor of experts from the government that didn't find Assange had a mental illness and wasn't likely to kill himself. And so this is the argument made by the government. And then the UK High Court this time ruled in favor of the US appeal, and now all this will be back on the table. Just quickly to lay out the reason why Kopelman says he didn't put this forward is because of protecting the identity of Stella Morris and the children, who, I guess if you look at it from a sense, this is a medical psychological evaluation. And so any information that isn't relevant to the autism finding, I guess he would feel like he doesn't have to put forward. There's an interesting argument to be made here both ways, especially because it's reasonably known and well reported that Julian Assange was the target of, the CIA. Hillary Clinton, when she was in the State Department, talked about drone striking, assassinating him. Mike Pompeo, the CIA director, has talked about assassinating him. He was surveilled by UC Global, a private contracting firm, with Sheldon Adelson being the CIA's cutout there. Spied on his private communications, attempted to get DNA samples from the diapers of Assange's children to prove that they were Assange's children. And so I think there was a reason for this Kopelman to feel that there was a particular concern for the safety of Stella Morris and the children, if her identity as Assange's partner and the identity of them being the children of Assange became public. This all seems perfectly reasonable to me. What the Kopelman's argument. However, there could be some nuance, and I could see why people argue the other way. However, when looking at the testimony that Kopelman put forward, as somebody who, my mother's a special education teacher, so I grew up around children with autism. I participated in some of autism watts and occasionally volunteering at the Special Olympics, and then as an adult, it was a few years ago, I spent time teaching in a school where we had students on the autism spectrum, and so I'm very familiar with it. And what the testimony he put forward, while I don't feel like I'm an expert on the situation, it definitely I know adults in the U.S. who have diagnosis of being on the autism spectrum disorder, or having, I think that's what it's called now, autism spectrum disorder. And so it seems perfectly reasonable to me, with the knowledge I have on this, that Assange would be somebody who, if he was in the U.S., would be on the autism spectrum. Now, I'm not sure how this works in the U.K. I know in the U.S. in the past 5 years or so, the DSM-5 has been implemented, where the U.S. went from recognizing Asperger's as its own condition to having just autism spectrum as somebody who formerly would have been diagnosed with autism and somebody who would have been diagnosed with Asperger's are now all on the autism spectrum. And so I'm not sure how that actually works in the UK, or how the UK court is evaluating it from that standpoint, because I don't know if Julian Assange maybe would have been diagnosed with autism in the U.S. 20 years ago. I do think he would be today. Again, that's just from some of my professional background knowledge. Anyways, the bad news for Assange, and hopefully, his defense team is able to overcome this appeal. I'm not exactly sure what happens for Assange if the appeal is granted, or if the U.S. wins the appeal. If then his defense team would have an ability to appeal the original decision by Judge Bannister that he should be extradited on the legal grounds in the first place, and this isn't a violation of freedom of speech and all of that. All right, moving on to some news about U.S. and China. First of all, this is absolutely ridiculous. The U.S. carried out another shot trial for its General R. Ford aircraft carrier. This is our new class of aircraft carrier. It's one of the newest aircraft carriers. And what the U.S. has done now is conducted a series of 3 tests, getting closer and closer with bigger and bigger bombs to the Ford. And this time they set off an explosion with 40,000 pounds of explosives and like a 3.9 magnitude earthquake, fairly close to the Ford. And the point of this was, I guess, they say to stress test to see what would happen if, let's say, a Chinese missile detonated close to the ship. Now, I'm not sure if this really does anything, let's say, if a Chinese anti-ship missile actually hit the ship or hit the deck of the ship in particular, but I guess they're simulating it exploding close. In response to this, the U.S. spread that it was a sign that the Chinese and Russian, particularly anti-ship missiles, would not be effective against their new aircraft carriers. I'm not so sure it shows that, but this testing of itself disturbs me because you're setting off this massive explosion in the ocean. I mean, everybody's so concerned about ocean currents and ocean temperatures and all that. Unnecessarily setting off this major explosion in the ocean seems to be really damaging. Who knows what kind of wildlife was, I'm sure, negatively impacted by this. I mean, according to the U.S., they said there was some minor damage done to the ship, and they say in their report that there were no major casualties, which seems to suggest that there were some minor casualties. This could just mean that like 4 soldiers fell out of their bunk and bruised their arms or something like that, but it could also mean that several soldiers got concussions or something along that line too. Not exactly sure how much damage it did, but I'm sure it did an awful lot of damage to like marine life in the ecosystem, especially since they've carried out 3 of these tests. They claim that, again, the tests were a success and that the damage will be repaired during scheduled maintenance last year. The last time these kind of tests were carried out was in 2016 on the littoral combat ships. I think that's about all I have from this particular story. But again, it's just, Biden's out there making these big announcements, how he's, doing all this climate change stuff. And he's so concerned we had to get rid of our, gas vehicles, and half the vehicles had to be electric by then the next decade or something like that. But at the same time, there's no concern in scaling back the U.S. military operations or doing crazy things like setting off massive bombs in the ocean. All right. Now, on to the tariffs, where U.S. retailers say that tariffs on Chinese goods are hurting U.S. business. This is by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com, saying a group of several retail associations is arguing that tariffs on Chinese goods are hurting businesses. 7 groups, including the National Retail Federation, filed a brief with the U.S. Court of International Trade on Monday in support of U.S. businesses negatively affected by Chinese tariffs. The brief supports a lawsuit filed by 600 plaintiffs in September 22 against the tariffs that have been implemented since 2018. I guess, maybe some people thought that Biden was going to reverse the tariffs because he said he was going to reverse everything that Trump did, but like we've seen with a lot of Biden's foreign policy, he's kept all these tariffs in place throughout his administration, and there's really no sign that they're going away anytime soon. So hopefully maybe this is a legal option to getting these unfair tariffs lifted. And also, tariffs are taxes, so if you could sue to get tariffs or taxes lifted, maybe we should look at doing this more often. The U.S. is carrying out massive war games in the Pacific, or I guess actually Singapore is the location. The Seascat Games involved 21 countries, 10 ships, 400 crew. The drills are going to be mostly virtual, kicking off on Thursday. But again, these are again massive drills, and they come on the heels of two other massive war games: the large-scale global exercise 21, which was worldwide, and then the large-scale exercise, which was I think more in the Indo-Pacific region. But we're continuing to see the U.S. wage these major war games in the region to build ties with militaries, with the goal of confronting China. So this is more and more of the aggressive actions that the U.S. continues to take against China in the South China, East China Sea, Indo-Pacific region. While the U.S. is holding these military games, China, or Taiwan, excuse me, is preparing to hold its own live fire war games. These are some of the largest war games that Taiwan has carried out. They're using runways further south than they've typically used in the past. My guess is that this is going to provoke some kind of response from China. I believe these games are set to kick off on September 13th, and once they conclude, the U.S. is going to kick off a larger set of war games in the region as well. And so, along with CCAD, large scale global, large scale exercises, we have massive amount of war games going on, all with the main intent of targeting and threatening China, building relationships against China. Another way the U.S. is building relationships against China is we're preparing to deepen ties between our two coast guards. The U.S. and Taiwan held talks between their coast guard and agreed to have regular discussions between the two. Some trainings are going to take place, and while this maybe seems somewhat benign, I mean, most of what the U.S. Coast Guard, most people are aware of what the Coast Guard does, is, rescuing people whose fishing ships, get swept way too out to sea or something like that. Those type of missions are patrolling the U.S. coastline for smugglers, drug traffickers, and the potential that there was some kind of attack happening against the U.S. naval. I guess, the Coast Guard would take part in that. People know that, but they really maybe don't realize that the Coast Guard operates around the world, including in the South China Sea, including in the Persian Gulf. And so, well, again, this maybe seems like, oh, this is just helping Taiwan's Coast Guard get better at rescuing people whose fishing boats get blown too far into the Pacific Ocean. That maybe seems like a good idea. There's a reason, and there's maybe some more nefarious activity behind this, especially as the U.S. is looking to deepen all of its ties with Taiwan. And, we have more and more hawks in the U.S. just looking to outright say we're going to defend Taiwan's independence from China, abandoning the decades-old one China policy that the U.S. has had, while recognizing that Taiwan and China are all part of the same country. Moving on to talk about some things going on in the Korean Peninsula. I believe on the show 2 weeks ago, I discussed South Korea and North Korea reopening hotlines that the two countries had, and that this being a step forward in communication. That the two leaders of the two countries, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, the president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, exchanged letters, and that things were going in a positive direction. Then we got this story, this from Reuters. Top diplomats of U.S. South Korea discuss ways to engage North Korea. This sounds like it could be a positive, not necessarily a radical change in U.S. policy or anything suggesting that we were seeing a major policy shift in the Biden administration, but nonetheless, they were holding talks about moving in the right direction. They did not discuss the prospect of any sanctions relief for North Korea, and there was a very clear tone that the United States maintains that we want North Korea to denuclearize. However, there was discussion of maybe giving some humanitarian aid to North Korea and some decent rhetoric from the U.S. saying that, the main focus should be getting South Korea and North Korea to negotiate. Of course, the biggest barrier in that is still, I think, the U.S. and our sanctions that we apply on North Korea and tell the South Koreans, that they can increase business and stuff like that. So hotlines are restored. This conversation happens again. It's not a major change in U.S. policy, but it could be a signal that the positive steps could be taken. And who knows what happens in 6 months down the road? The U.S. is maybe willing to soften on the denuclearization policy. However, this seems to have deteriorated now, as South Korea said it would go ahead and begin war games with the U.S. They started the preliminary part of these war games already, with the major part of the war games set to start on August 16th and run through August 26th. They're called the Crisis Management Staff Training, which sounds like the most boring 2-hour training that you're going to have to sit through. But what it really is massive war games where the U.S. and South Korea simulate invasions of North Korea and what to do in different situations, how to secure North Korea's nuclear weapons and all of that. North Korea rightfully sees this as, a threat and a plan to invade North Korea, while the U.S. and South Korea try to play down that part of it. Every time this happens, North Korea gets very upset. It's very funny. The Reuters article really tries to dismiss this, but North Korea has for decades reacted angrily, calling them a rehearsal for war. Well, that's what they are, and their military drills for war against North Korea. This is quite literally what they are, and they say that this is just the North Korean interpretation, and kind of shrugs at why North Korea would get upset at this. And so, in response, North Korea has stopped answering the hotlines that were set up. The kind of only positive step that's been taken forward since Hanoi between the U.S. and North Korea, or U.S. South Korea North Korea relations, has now been undone because of these war games. And it's just absurd how many war games the U.S. carries out, and how other countries have to respond to this, because it is the world's hegemon, the world's superpower, the world's largest military preparing and simulating invading your country. This constantly forces other countries to react, invest more, spend more on their military, and maybe act more hostily towards the U.S., which only exacerbates the situation. So that's what's going on in North Korea. I kind of expect that next week, as these war games go from the preliminary to the full-on phase, that North Korea is going to maybe test some weapons, release some hawkish statements, or do something to let the world know their displeasure of the current situation. All right, now on to Afghanistan, where we had 10, 11, now probably by the time you're listening to this podcast, more provincial capitals of Afghanistan fall. There's 32 in total. The 10th to fall was Ghazni. It's the capital of the Ghazni province. They both go by the same name there. And it is a major city on the Kabul to Kandahar highway that links those two cities. And so I'm guessing this is going to really hurt, slash maybe, again, by the time people are already listening to this, there's 34 provincial capitals in Afghanistan. But I think that this is going to be a major blow to the Afghan government's fight for the capital city of Kandahar, and likely cause that city to be lost. The Taliban were already talking about how they had taken that city as I was going on here. Not sure if that's actually the case, or if the Afghan government could push back, but they're very close to doing this, and taking Ghazni is going to put them closer. So again, this is another key city. Another city that fell that's pretty key is Harat. It's the third largest city in Afghanistan, and again, as of now, those are the 11 provincial capitals that have fallen. There's reports of Mazar-e-Sharif, Baghuz, Lashkar-Gah, and Kandahar all being right on the edge of being overrun and taken over by the Taliban. Pretty interesting city is Mazar-e-Sharif. This is the stronghold of Afghan warlord Dostum, who's a kind of, I think, famed anti-Taliban fighter in Afghanistan. And this city, I guess he reported that the president of Afghanistan, Ghani, and Dostum traveled there to try to rally support and fighters against the Taliban. And so this is a pretty serious situation. It looks like the Kabul government is really on shaky foundations. Again, this is the government, the army that the U.S. spent the past 2 decades building, and we're not even finished our withdrawal from the country. We're not ending operations until August 31st. We've stepped up airstrikes to try to cut this off, and yet a third or so now of the country has already, or at least the capitals, have fallen into the hands of the Taliban. The European Union put out an estimate, I believe on Tuesday, saying that they believe 65% of the country is under control of the Taliban. I would believe that was by area and not population. A lot of people live in Kabul and some of the cities in the east that are still controlled by the Afghan government. And so it's possible that a large percentage of the population still isn't under Taliban control. But they are wrapping up some major victories. Kandahar and Lashkar in southern western Afghanistan would be major victories for them. They are in heavy Pashtun areas, but these are major cities that the Afghan government has held, and the U.S. has spent a lot of time in securing and taking from the Taliban over the past 20 years. As well as taking provincial capitals, the Taliban have been taking border crossings. Russia reported that the Taliban have captured the border, I guess the entire border of Afghanistan between Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. So anybody looking at the map here can see that, these are countries to Afghanistan's north. And this is like from our I guess, Turkmenistan all the way to China, and actually I believe they now control the province of Afghanistan that links Afghanistan to China, and so these are big strategic games that the Taliban have been able to make recently. Along with just taking territory, the Taliban are also capturing prisoners. There's a lot of Afghan troops that are being captured. Not sure what's happening to them, according to the UN, and I believe this was as of Wednesday, so the total is probably higher. But so far in the Taliban offensive in August, 1,000 civilians have been killed. And it's not exactly clear in that UN number who's behind all the killings. My guess is it's a mix between numerous parties, potentially even the Islamic State Khorasan group, but mainly the Taliban, the Afghan National Army, and then the U.S. CIA, State Department, and any airstrikes that we're carrying out in the country. But along with capturing Taliban soldiers, and probably more importantly, the Taliban have been capturing weapons and military equipment at the Kunduz airfield. In particular, there was rumored to be a helicopter that was in disrepair, but that was left there. There's videos of the Taliban, and unable to verify all of them, but a couple of them I was kind of able to say that it looks like it's happening at this time. Reverse search doesn't hit any past results. These appear to be Taliban fighters. It's in Kunduz and all that, and it looks like that they've captured a significant number of vehicles and small arms, potentially larger things, airplane parts, drone parts. I haven't seen any like large missiles or anything like that captured, but advanced military vehicles, and again, probably the parts from a helicopter in disrepair at the Kunduz airfield. They've also been able to take some prisons and free a lot of Taliban prisoners. I'm sure this is aiding their offensive quite a bit. So one of the things that I want to talk about here is that while this has to reflect negatively on the Afghan government and its ability to rally people to its fighters and maintain territory and everything like that, the U.S. is really deflecting all the problems onto the Afghans. And the U.S. has to look in the mirror here and say, we spent 2 decades building this state. It can't hold on at all. Also, I think a lot of the blame of at least this initial loss has to go to the fact that the U.S. essentially left the Afghan government on the hook this whole time, maybe suggesting that we might stay a little bit, blowing past the May 1st deadline, by not making this announcement, until a couple months ago. If the U.S. had stuck with the original agreement and had been very clear from the beginning that this war for the United States is over May 1st, or what would it be, April 30th or 31st, 2021, then the Afghan government, I think, would have maybe done a better job preparing for that. But they were preparing as if the U.S. would end up staying, which they didn't do, which I think is part of the reason this is all blowing up in their face and so quickly. Who knows if the Kabul will even make it to August 31st here. When we actually talk about this, the date the U.S. is set to leave. I don't know if the Taliban, if they defeat the Afghan government before August 31st, if that means that the U.S. technically lost this war, but it sure the hell seems like it. Now, I will say that while, at the pace the Taliban are picking up territory at this point with the additional weapons and soldiers that they're picking up from their victories, it seems like the progress and the victories are going to continue to be very rapid. That said, I think that a lot of the territory that the Taliban are picking up right now are heavily Pashtun territory. It's territory that the capitals of provinces where the Taliban have controlled a lot of the countryside and the rural areas of that country for years. This is Taliban country, not exclusively, but a lot of it. And I'm curious if the Taliban, as they tried to take more and more territory that is traditionally Uzbek, Tajik, or Hezbollah, something like that then there would be more of a resistance, and it would be a lot harder to continue to take this territory. So we will see, and I'll continue to update it on the show. Now let's look at the actions that the U.S. has taken to, the response to what's happening on the ground. This U.S. State Department has issued an alert urging U.S. citizens to leave Afghanistan on commercial flights if available. They say if you can afford to purchase a ticket at this time, contact the embassy for information. They say don't delay your departure, and that basically if you don't work for the U.S. government, to get the hell out of the country now. And then this was issued before the U.S. Decided to cut back its embassy staff, and I think they're now doing like a bare bones embassy staff. They've scaled up the number of flights that they're trying to get. Again, people maybe who work for NGOs, work for the U.S. government in different capacities in Afghanistan, interpreters, everything like that, out of the country as quickly as possible. However, again, this is something where it should have been happening over the past year and a half, not just over the past couple of weeks like the U.S. has been doing. I'm not even clear where the U.S. is taking all the people that are leaving. One of the reasons that could be an issue is apparently there's at least a dozen or so Filipino contractors that formerly worked for the U.S. that are just stranded in Dubai for whatever reason. They can't get on a plane, COVID restrictions, stuff like that. They can't go back to the Philippines. Obviously, they can't go back to Afghanistan. And so they're essentially right now just stranded in a hotel in Dubai. And so not having a secure plan of what the hell we're going to do with all the people who helped our war effort all these years, and doing this, so half-assed at the last minute, we're seeing some real repercussions, and it's going to be a very miserable experience for a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of these Afghans being taken out of the country aren't necessarily going to live in great conditions for an extended period of time, and also for people in Afghanistan who aren't able to get out quick enough, it's going to cost some people their lives. And again, I think a lot of this, some blame deservedly goes to the Afghans and the Afghan government, but a lot, the finger should be pointed at DC for not being more prepared for this. We've been building Afghanistan for 2 decades. We're going to have to leave at some point. And, after all that, they're acting like they don't know what to do. And I'm sure part of it, that, there are branches and different, actors involved who were intentionally dragging their feet, kind of seeing it as, if you got to tell me to go a few times before I start to do this stuff. And if we drag our feet enough, then the whole thing's just going to be called off in the end. And that doesn't seem like it may be the case here. And I'll get into a little bit more of that soon. Now, the U.S., as it's evacuating a lot of its embassy staff, is also floating the idea of just closing it or moving the embassy to the I believe airport, the Afghan airport, is where they're talking about moving it. And in fact, this according to the New York Times, that Zalmay Khalilzad, the U.S. envoy to Afghanistan, actually met with Taliban officials in Doha and asked that they would secure the U.S. embassy. I'm guessing that's not going to be something that they're going to do, and the U.S. will just end up having to abandon our embassy at some point. But it was interesting that one of the things the U.S. floated as one of the reasons that to keep the embassy is that aid funnels through the embassy. So it almost sounds like saying, hey, if you allow us to keep our embassy, we'll give you guys some aid, or make sure aid is going to Afghanistan while you're in charge, which is a little bit of contradiction. Which one of the other things that Zalmay Khalilzad has been telling the Afghans, and that is they would be isolated internationally if they take over. Now, I think there's a sense that the Taliban may not care a whole lot, but as I point out in several shows in the past, the border crossings with these countries that the Taliban are taking, the Afghan side, they're opening back up. The Taliban are meeting, or the Chinese are meeting with the Taliban. The Russians are meeting with the Taliban. The Iranians have held meetings with the Taliban. The ISI in Pakistan has been a long-time backer of the Taliban. And so I don't think there's any reason to assume that the Taliban would be all that isolated. Maybe the U.S. could put sanctions on them and get our European and NATO allies to go along with that, but I'm not sure how much of a difference that's really going to make to the Taliban. Again, especially when it seems like they would be able to maybe work out their own deals or agreements with Russia and China to block any UN kind of sanctions from their takeover. So that's I think a lot of the situation with the U.S. Embassy and our diplomats in Afghanistan. At this point, it seems like we're scaling it down, and there's going to be no choice but to leave. Although I have seen ideas floated out like moving the embassy to the airport, and even U.S. NATO ally Turkey has, and the leader, President Erdogan, has been said he's open to meeting with the Taliban to talk about the security of the airport. So maybe that's a way that the U.S. could work out keeping some kind of embassy in Afghanistan as moving into the airport, allowing the Turks to maintain the security force there. But I'm not sure the Taliban would go for it, and they're not even sure that they're willing to meet with Turkey. But this is another example of the U.S. is saying the Taliban are going to be isolated and lack international legitimacy. Not so much. It seems like an awful lot of countries, even countries the U.S. has deep ties with, Turkey and Pakistan, are more than willing to talk to the Taliban. Now, the Huts aren't giving up on Afghanistan yet. We have this report from NBC where they talked to CENTCOM General Kenneth McKenzie. I've talked about this guy on the show a lot. I think he's one of the main Huts trying to keep the U.S. in Afghanistan. And he's saying that he doesn't think the Taliban are going to keep al-Qaeda out. He didn't necessarily say that the Taliban are going to support the al-Qaeda and invite them into the country, but just says that, look, the Taliban are going to increase their presence in the country if al-Qaeda will increase their presence in the country if the Taliban take over. And so, this is the safe haven myth. Scott Horton has done such a great job debunking this. I've debunked it on the show over and over again. If you look at where 9/11 was planned, most of it wasn't in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden himself ends up being killed in Pakistan. There's really no leadership of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And while the U.S. continues to claim there's al-Qaeda presence in Afghanistan, there's little evidence that they have to show this. Not that there maybe aren't a few al-Qaeda fighters that live in Afghanistan or take up residence there, but the idea that there's hundreds of them, like Mackenzie said, seems doubtful to me, and that the Taliban are going to facilitate them coming back again seems doubtful. it'll be interesting to see how the Taliban react to what China demanded, which is that they cut off their support for their, I believe it's like the Eastern Turkmenistan Islamic movement. It's the Uyghur, the like jihadist Uyghur faction that is in Afghanistan and carries out and has been in the past on the U.S. terrorism list. And carries out terrorist attacks, and so China has asked the Taliban to cut off with them. The Taliban may see like, hey, we will, distance ourselves and prevent these jihadist movements from taking out because we don't want intervention from the Chinese, the Russians, the Americans in our country. If some Saudi, Chechenian, Uyghur carries out a terrorist attack in any of those countries. So, there is an Islamist problem in Afghanistan. A lot of this, of course, and who knows how many of the quote unquote Al Qaeda fighters that are in Afghanistan are only there because of the U.S. operations against the Soviets, where we were backing and facilitating, groups like the Mujahideen, which become and Al Qaeda, the Taliban, and Osama bin Laden, stuff like that in Afghanistan in order, as a civil Cold War proxy war against the Soviets. Interesting statement by John Kirby, who is the U.S. Pentagon spokesperson, and he says that no decision has been made about carrying out U.S. airstrikes in Afghanistan after August 31st. I mean, the U.S. is continuing to say that we will have an over-horizon capability to carry out airstrikes, but that seems, far different, carrying out drone strike against Al-Qaeda versus continuing to carry out these heavy bombardments with B-52s against the Taliban in support of the Afghan government. And it's not exactly clear even what Kirby's kind of responding to, saying that we're going to maintain the over-horizon capability, but we're not going to carry out strikes against the Afghans. My guess is that the U.S. continues to plan to carry some airstrikes out against Taliban in Afghanistan moving forward. Last Afghan story here is Biden says he does not regret his decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. This from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. And this is a somewhat brave thing to say because the Afghan state is falling apart quickly, and as I've been talking about on the show the past couple of weeks, the U.S. is going to quickly face a situation in Afghanistan where they're going to have to decide to escalate or withdraw and end this war completely. The Afghan state doesn't seem to have staying power for very long, and so again, decision time is coming up, and Biden's saying he's not regretting this decision to withdraw. Does kind of suggest to me that he's serious and that he would rather, just bring all the troops home and the Afghan state crumble, then allow, a major surge into the country and to continue this war for years into the future. Although I'm definitely not saying that that's what's going to happen. I'm just saying that Biden does seem committed to actually trying to end this war. And if the tough decision comes soon, he seems at this point to prepare to make it. But, we'll see when the time comes. Few stories on Israel before we wrapped up. Israel and Hezbollah exchanged rocket fire. I guess that was last week. It started off when I believe 3 rockets were fired from southern Lebanon into Israel. I don't even think all 3 of them made it. It's unclear of who fired the rockets. It was I think reported to be Shia groups, but exactly unclear. At least that was the Israel claim of who did it. And then Israel responded by carrying out fairly heavy airstrikes, but I don't think they actually carried out any strikes that killed anyone in Lebanon, but did destroy some structures. Israel also carried out artillery fire into Lebanon. Hezbollah responded by carrying out rockets into Israel, but intentionally hitting open area. And then the leader of Hezbollah followed this up with a threat, saying that the group was ready to escalate against Israel, but no response came. And it seems that we moved past this, although it's worth knowing it's been like 15 years since this amount of fire was exchanged over that border, and it could be a sign of things to come. We also see Israel bombing Hamas, what they say are Hamas sites in Gaza, in response to fire balloons. This is, they'll fill up balloons, they'll attach some kind of burning thing to the end of the balloon and float it over the border. A lot of times, I don't know if a lot's the right word, sometimes these will cause brush fires in southern Israel, but really no more damage than that. Israel came and carried out airstrikes. I wasn't able to gain reports on casualties from these airstrikes in Gaza, but this is obvious disproportionate amount of force that Israel is using here. It's worth knowing that the Palestinians say that they carry out the incendiary balloons basically to say, like, hey, we're still here and we're suffering and dying. Israel is supposed to be easing more restrictions on imports to Gaza, easing restrictions on how far off the coast the people of Gaza could fish and stuff like that, but Israel isn't holding up to all their agreements there. Interesting here, Israel is said to approve home permits for the West Bank, but this time apparently not just for settlers, but also for Palestinians as well. The report is that they are going to improve 2,000 new homes for Jewish settlers and also 1,000 new homes for Palestinians. Almost all the new home permits do go to the Jewish settlers in the West Bank, so this is uncommon for it to happen to the Palestinians, but occasionally Palestinians can build new homes, and so it's not like this doesn't happen at all. At the same time, my guess is that the settler homes get completed first. Not all 1,000 Palestinian homes will be completed, and they won't be in nice of areas. They will be built in areas that don't make a lot of sense for the Palestinians, and this is a part of Israel's plan to take over, at the very least, all the good parts of the West Bank and give Palestinians little Bantu stands throughout the West Bank, or just one day officially annexing and moving all the Palestinians off the land altogether. All right, before we wrap, last story here from Day to Camp, again at antiwar.com. CIA chief, that's William Burns, meets Israeli Prime Minister amid Iran tensions. And not only did Burns meet with the Prime Minister, but also met with Defense Minister Benny Gantz and Israeli Mossad, that is their, CIA, their spy agency, their chief, David Barnera. And all these meetings, to me, suggest that the maybe some covert stuff being planned right now between the CIA and Mossad. And in the past, this has led to assassinations, explosions, and stuff like that in Iran. We know that the U.S., along with Israel, is blaming Iran for the attack on the Mercer Strait and other cargo ships in the Gulf of Oman, Arabian Sea. And so I could see the U.S., quote unquote, looking to respond here by backing the Israeli move, and sending Burns to Israel would be a way to plot and plan this. So it's possible that's what's going on here. I'm not exactly sure. Obviously, this is intelligence agencies meeting, but it's worth noting that our CIA chief was recently in Israel. All right, that's where I'm wrapping up today's show. Hope everybody's enjoying the show. You're getting a lot out of it. Going to continue to have a lot of content on Afghanistan, of course, as hopefully the U.S. mission in Afghanistan is coming to an end. At very least, all of our ground presence in the country, and who knows, maybe if the Afghan government falls, we just decide to stop bombing people there too. But depending on the decisions that Joe Biden makes, it's really important to cover this. I don't think the administration actually has it all laid out right now. I think there's plenty of room for this policy to change in the coming days. So I really want to cover it, and I think the anti-war movement in particular needs to be very vocal that we don't want to extend this conflict any further and to shout down the Matt's Boots and Dan Crenshaws of the world. All right, share the show on, we have social media accounts, Facebook, MeWe, and Twitter. Subscribe to the show on any of the video sites, Odyssey, Rumble, and YouTube, especially Odyssey or Rumble, because again, got a feeling our days on YouTube are numbered. We're putting out a ton of clips of every show. Please share those out, guys, and just continue to support the show and enjoy your weekend.